Part 2 of Unit 4 looks at crime and violence. We're going to look at basic types and theories. What is a crime? A crime, according to Condon and Julian, is any act or omission of an act for which a state or country can apply sanctions. There are so many different types of crimes. Some of them include violent personal crimes like assault, criminal homicide, it can be murder, manslaughter, white-collar crimes and corporate crimes, juvenile delinquency, and the list goes on and on and on. There are different explanations of crime. We're going to revisit the three major perspectives, sociological perspectives, that we would have done in Unit 1, and we also would have applied in the previous units as well. We're going to look at the conflict perspective on crime, the functionalist perspective, and the interactionist perspective on crime. We're also going to look at how gender, age, and psychological state, how each of them relates to crime. So what does the conflict perspective has to say on criminal activity? According to the conflict perspective, most crimes is either a form of rebellion by members of a lower social class or a form of illegal exploitation by the rich and powerful. And I think we can actually see this as an example in society today. Conflict theorists, they highlight things like racial profiling as one of the examples of how the dominant group tend to abuse their power and victimize members of lower groups. Police officers, for example, may stop persons from minority groups or a certain social group more often than they would persons of another group. And research has shown that this is in fact true. According to the functionalist perspective, crime stems from the uncertainty about norms of proper conduct that accompanies rapid social change and social disorganization. The functionalist perspective claims that society kind of goes through a process that is known as anomie, or in other words, a sort of normlessness, where the normal things that we would do in society have become sort of done away with or obsolete, like saying please and thank you, or holding the door for someone, or just normal social graces that we would do. These things have lessened or stopped, and so the result would mean that we engage in criminal activity. The interactionist perspective has a very interesting view on crime. It says that people tend to drift toward criminal subcultures and they become socialized for criminal careers. And this brings into question the whole aspect of gangs and gang-related criminal behavior. There's something that is very interesting on the interactionist perspective that was highlighted by a study done by Walter Miller. Now, this was done in 1958, but it's still applicable because it has to do with the values of delinquent subcultures. Now, they highlighted different characteristics that a delinquent subculture would value, like trouble. Getting into trouble has a different definition for somebody that is in a gang. Toughness, the more abuse or aggression that you exhibit, the more tough you are seen to be. You also have smartness, not in terms of your IQ, but in terms of street smarts, knowing how to get around and con people, excitement, the thrill of the chase, you know, faith, thinking that, you know, your life is headed to a bad direction anyway, so you might as well just engage in criminal activity. And autonomy, having that sense of independence, that you don't have to depend on working for somebody else to gain money, one, or not having to follow the laws of the land like everybody else. You are your own man, you are your own person. These factors are very important in understanding why gangs will, you know, have a different subculture, and they will engage in a different set of behaviors because they define certain things differently. Gender, age, and psychological state. Gender relates to crime in a big way. Men tend to engage in crime more often than women do. In terms of age, adolescents and young adults, they tend to commit crimes more often. And related to part 1 of this module, remember that this age group, they also tend to use and abuse alcohol and other drugs more. So we see that the use and abuse of alcohol and other drugs directly relates to criminal activity, because adolescents and young adults, they engage in risk-taking behavior. A person's psychological state can also affect whether or not they engage in criminal activity. An interesting example is actually somebody who is going through postpartum depression. They may, because of that state of depression with their neurobiology being affected, they might tend to commit murder or some sort of assault because of what is happening with their hormones and what is happening in their brain. What role do gangs play in criminal activity? Gang warfare is becoming commonplace in Caribbean countries, and I think practically every Caribbean country is experiencing this element of gang warfare. But we have countries where we see that it is becoming a everyday norm, especially in Jamaica, in Trinidad and Tobago, and in St. Lucia. And I'm sure you would see as well that it is becoming a major issue in Antigua as well. Gangs have initiation rituals, and these rituals are in and of themselves quite violent. Sometimes you may have to kill someone in order to prove that you have what it takes to be a part of the gang. One of the major issues is that young black males are being targeted. As young as 12, 11 years old, they may be targeted to be a part of these gangs and to engage in criminal activity. And they tend to gravitate towards these gangs because they feel accepted and they have a sense of belonging. And these are very strong psychological attributes that can pull these young people to these groups, especially if they do not have any strong role models in their immediate family or surroundings. They tend to look up to these gang leaders, and these young men become fully committed to these gangs, and they go the extra mile. They go all out in terms of criminal activity. And unfortunately, what happens is that they meet very violent and very gruesome deaths in the end. And that is the nature of gang gangs and criminal activity. And that's basically the end for these two lecture videos on alcohol and other drugs and crime and violence.